Hey everybody, welcome back to season 3 of the Night Writer podcast, and I'm very, very happy to introduce our first guest, award-winning author, James Ross. James, hi, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
So we're here to talk about your new book, which is coming out in April of this year.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
It's called Coldwater Confessions, and it's a sequel to a book called Coldwater Revenge, which I believe came out last year.
Yes. I had the temerity to sign a 3-book contract requiring me to deliver a book a year for 3 years, and I will never do that again.
Okay.
It's like being back in university again, and you have this senior paper hanging over your head at the end of the term for 3 terms running.
Yeah, because I heard that you had signed on to a 3-book deal, and I thought, most authors would be absolutely like, oh my God, we've got a deal. But then I'm thinking, well, that presumably they want, first draft by this thing, second draft by this, and then this and this. And I was going to ask you, does that help or hinder your creativity when you get put a deadline on these things?
It's awful, to be honest. But I thought I was being smart because I already had 2 books in the trunk ready to go. So I figured, okay, sign a 3-book contract. Really, all I have to do is produce the 3rd. But as you probably know, it's the nature of publishing that everybody who has a hand in the process is a frustrated artist who believes that with certain major changes, your work will be vastly improved. And they suggest that you make them. And once you start doing that, it's a little bit like software programming. You change one thing here, and the ripple effect across a multi-product sequence can get totally out of control. So while I did have 2 books already written, the process of accommodating changes from editors, publishers, agents, etc., made me much farther behind in the game than I thought I was.
Yeah, I can understand actually how frustrating that must be, because I work in the theatre industry, and there's loads of people who've got hands in that as well. Sometimes for good, not necessarily for ill, because sometimes I feel like you need an extra eye to see look over your script. But then sometimes when it has too many fingers in it, it's like you lose sight of your own creativity and the vision you had and the story you had to begin with, and you think, hang on, who's writing this thing?
It's particularly troubling in the mystery genre because not only are you telling a story in its usual form about people and characters and their story arcs, etc., but there's a puzzle in the center of it with clues. So if somebody has an idea to cut out this scene or add that scene, that's all well and good, but if there were clues in the scene that they want to cut out, or red herrings leading to suspects who you think did it but didn't actually do it, etc., you start messing with the architecture there. It can get really crazy really fast.
Yeah, but I mean, why would they want to do that? I mean, presumably they read the whole book, so they know about the red herrings and the clues. Do they feel that you're giving the game away too early, or?
Some of it is economics. I ran into this with Coldwater Revenge. The original manuscript was about 100,000 words long. And the economics of putting out a trade paperback, are basically drive the sales are driven by the price, that the retail price of the book. So at 100,000 words, you have to price it in the US at about $25. At 80,000 words, you can price it at about $16, $17. And that apparently makes a huge difference in the initial sales for a new author. People are willing to spend $17 and take a chance on a new author, not so crazy about spending 25. So, the publisher says, cut 30,000 words. And, so we can price it right. And it's like, okay, I get the economics, I get the business, but what about the clues? What about the characters? What about the puzzle? And it's a tension between the art and the marketing.
Yeah. Sorry, I think we've lost your audio.
Really?
Yeah, it just went off for a bit.
Okay.
I think we're about. Yeah, the last thing we heard was it's a tension between the marketers and the author.
Yes, it's basically price drives sales, and the number of words in the manuscript drives price. So at a certain word count, the publisher will say, "I don't want to go to market with this book and have to price it at $25. I want to go to market and price it at 16. So you cut 30,000 words." And because you're such a fantastic artist, we're sure you can do that without butchering the manuscript.
Oh, that's like emotional. That's great manipulation there.
Yes. Well, for a lot of writers, we think that, once we finish the manuscript and that last word, the end, appears, you're finished. That's the finish line. Yeah. The truth is, that's the starting line.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it gets really complicated really fast.
Yeah, the editing process for me is hell. I hate it. I can't do my own work, but I think, and also when sort of producers and the directors like, you need to get rid of this and this, or you need to make this and this, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that, because I mean going back into that world again. I've just come out of it, but you're going back in there with like a technical viewpoint. You're not back in the story again, and it's quite hard, because when you're in that creative mindset, and then it's like, to get back in there and I need to cut bits of the story, it's like, well, what are the characters doing now?
I think it's particularly difficult in book length fiction, because you don't have immediate feedback from your audience. So you may have spent years on a book. Your editor, has read it, or your publisher at once removed, but they have their personal point of view, but not an audience feedback. Which is why, I don't know if you've had a chance to visit my website, but which is why I really enjoy live storytelling, which we do out here in the Western US quite a bit. There's a long tradition of what we call tall tale storytelling. Yeah. And you appear in front of a live audience and you tell a story, and within a nanosecond whether you've made a connection with your audience and whether they're interested, or whether they're just going to, get up and go to the bar and have a drink.
I love that.
And it's absolutely invaluable for a storyteller of any kind, because we miss that as writers. We sit behind our computers for, days, weeks, months at a time with absolutely no feedback, but, the feedback we give ourselves in our head.
Well, tall tales, I mean, that's kind of how writers started out in the first place, just kind of telling things in like bars and taverns, and then it all got collected and like Grimm Brothers and Charles Perrault, and put in the fairy tale books and stuff. Because I did a few episodes on this in season 1 about all of that. It just was passed on through word. And you mentioned you live in Wyoming.
Yes.
I kind of had this, I don't know, this image when you said about everyone sharing stories, everyone gathered around a campfire and telling the story. Is it like that, or is it just something else?
Well, we do it at bars here.
Much
but
better. Yeah.
In the town I live in, there's about 9,000 people. It's in the Teton Valley of Wyoming near Yellowstone National Park. So in this particular environment, there are more bison, elk, moose, and wolves than there are people. So the folks gather, and in the winter time it gets to be about 40 degrees below zero. So there's an active community of really artists who gather on a regular basis in the local bars, play music, and tell stories.
Well, that sounds really cool. Do you use that as an inspiration for your books? Because I know it's set in small towns.
I use it really to hone my craft, and as a reminder that I cannot make the assumption that my audience shares the same culture or cultural assumptions that I do. For example, many times in the live storytelling competitions, people are telling, stories of their youths and the adventures they got into, things like that. Well, my youth was during the Vietnam War era. And I know if I say Ho Chi Minh, who happened to be the leader of North Vietnam during that conflict, I know who he is, and everybody of my generation knows that. But I look out at the audience, which is young cowboys and baristas or whatever from the Teton Valley. I say Ho Chi Minh, they think it's an entree at the local Thai restaurant. So, that's important to know. And I learned it the hard way, or I learned the hard way in writing historical fiction, which my first book was about an attempted assassination of Teddy Roosevelt. And I found, to my utter horror, that in the publishing community in New York, which is 2 generations younger than myself, people didn't know who Teddy Roosevelt was. They weren't sure. Is that the guy who was president during World War II, the cripple in the wheelchair, that kind of stuff. So live storytelling is a quick reminder of the gap between you and your audience, if it exists. And then as a writer, the challenge in historical fiction, if you have that kind of gap, is to get the history in without boring the bejesus out of your reader. And that in itself is an art.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's good advice actually, because I'm definitely going to say, because I'm writing sort of a historical romance, but set in the Regency era. And I know that it's a thing now, like it's a market, the Regency era, but there was a lot going on historically at the time, like the Napoleonic Wars. But I feel like people who don't know that, or even know who like Wellington is, or anything that was going on in Britain at the time, would know that. So it's like, how do you drip that in without overloading it and making it like something a history novel? I've kind of just gone down the route of a little bit of sarcasm away, or just having it through the dialogue, I guess.
That's really the best way. In fiction, we all have a problem as fiction writers in that the point of view character, the point of view character is the storyteller, and we get what's going on because we're inside his or her head. Unlike a film where the point of view is the camera, and there's no internal rumination. But in fiction, you can't always be in your character's head and keep the action flowing and keep your reader's interest. So, as you point out, dialogue, giving each of the point of view characters a buddy, if you will, where they have conversations and you can get the history in, or you can get the background in. So you're not always in the head of the character, but you're in the room with real people talking about real stuff. I mean, that's craft. And I think every fiction writer comes to that point eventually.
Yeah, I mean, because chances are they would have had those conversations in whatever fiction, whatever era you're in, and they would be having a war, World War I or II, any war. They'd be talking about it, kind of like how we all are talking about the pandemic all the time. And if someone was writing historical fiction 20, 30 years from now, they would have to do that, or just see things on the newspaper, just little things that just drips that in as to what era you're in. And also, I think the way they speak as well. Do you find it hard when you're writing historical fiction to get the voices of the...
I find it a challenge. In Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, there are actually 5 different languages because it took place in Central Africa at the turn of the century, with Roosevelt on safari through British East Africa and German.
Oh no, I think we lost you again.
English, and German, and it, this was the actual collection of characters on that safari, and to create authentic dialogue among people who are using whatever language they have in common, but is never necessarily their first language.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic challenge. I enjoyed it tremendously, but it was not easy.
And you, Teddy Roosevelt, obviously a real person. Did you have to try and get inside his mindset as who he was, and how much research did that involve to
It
get?
was a tremendous amount of research. Fortunately for me, Roosevelt was a prolific author himself, because in his era, there was no such thing as a presidential pension after you left office. So he had to make his living as a writer.
Yeah.
And he was a brilliant writer. And he wrote probably the best safari book I've ever read, African Game Trails. And my book basically follows his safari book, but telling the untold story of that safari, which was somebody, while he was hunting, somebody was hunting him and trying to make sure that he did not come back from Africa alive. A lot of research went into that. But more important than the research, really, I think, is the story arc of the people themselves. In the case of Roosevelt on safari, he went with his son Kermit, who unfortunately was alcoholic, depressive, and he later in adult life took his own life. So part of the adventure, part of that story is the father and son dynamic of a dad with a mentally ill child. And that research was, you know, that research was difficult because there's not a lot on it, but the story is, to me anyway, very human and quite fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, because he was a president, but he was a father dealing with this very real, very human challenge that people could relate to, I suppose, no matter what era you're in.
That's it. And I think that's what readers are looking. They want to be entertained, but if the human drama isn't there, you've basically got cartoon characters. But once you touch something real and raw, you're halfway home.
I completely agree. And going back to Coldwater, is the books, are they different mysteries in each book, or is it just one continuous story?
There are three different mysteries, but what holds them together is it's the story of two brothers who are generally involved with the same woman and all the complications that ensue when that unfortunate set of circumstances arises. And then there's, a dead body in there somewhere, and they have to cooperate in solving the murder at the same time, be rivals for the affection of somebody who doesn't deserve it.
Wow. Wait, is someone who doesn't deserve it? You talk about the woman?
Yeah, as in like she's the murderess.
Right. Okay. So it's basically the conflict between two, because I love stories about two brothers. I just think that the whole bromance thing is just so, I will watch anything, I read anything, so I just think that dynamic is so, I don't know, there's just something about it that's just really touching, I find.
It's utterly fascinating. The way this particular concept came about is I have two sons, and when they were very close in age, and when they were about to enter high school, their mother said to me, my worst nightmare is that they fall for the same girl. And bingo, that was the germ of the idea for the murder mystery.
That's perfect. So it actually really draws on like a real personal kind of experience, and well, sort of, but like a fear that.
Yes, and of course, as with all siblings, you may have a similar, upbringing, but no two are at all alike. And
in the book, are they twins, or are they just?
They're just a year apart. What we call in the U.S. Irish twins.
Okay, Irish. Oh yeah, Irish twins. Hopefully, does that conflict kind of carry throughout the whole three, or?
Yes. The basic conflict between the brothers is one. Their dad was the local sheriff and was killed on the job. One of those classic tough guys. The younger brother follows in his father's footsteps and goes into local law enforcement. The older brother becomes a lawyer, kicks the dust off this tiny town, and heads to Wall Street to make his fortune, because he wants to prove to his somewhat corrupt family that you can make money legitimately. You don't have to be a corrupt cop and take advantage of all the chisels available to people in that position. And that's the tension between the brothers. One stayed home and continued the family tradition. The other tries to break away from it. But what happens in each of the three books is that a local murder in the town takes place. An older brother, the Wall Street lawyer, comes back and helps younger brother, the cop, solve it.
Have we lost you again?
It could be.
Yeah, it ended on a cliffhanger. It was he comes back and helps the younger brother solve, and then you cut off. We were like, wait, what?
And that's, I wouldn't call it a formula, but that's the principal dynamic. It's a story of a typical corrupt cop's family and two sons who grew up in it. One stays the course and continues the somewhat unsavory tradition, and the other one tries and succeeds in breaking free, but at a cost. If you decide to deracinate yourself from your culture and roots, there are consequences.
And your and the second book has already been done and is ready for release now?
Yes, I delivered that about 3 weeks ago. The editors are in the process of taking a red pen to it and doing all the nasty things that they do, but it will come out in April.
And dare I ask how the third book's coming along?
I'm actually about 20 pages into an outline for the third book, because I have to deliver a first draft in October, and that will wrap it up. It will be a 3-book series.
Okay, that's good. I mean, congratulations on the deal. I know it's hard work, but it's every author's dream, I guess.
Yes, I mean, I wrote my first book when I was at university, and I got my first one published the same year I started collecting Social Security. So it was an overnight success, 45 years in the making.
How did it feel to actually, when it was finally published, to have your first book to hold in your hand?
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And, well worth the wait. I'm fortunate enough now to be able to write full time, and which is what I wanted to do in my 20s. But, things like putting food on the table and paying kids' school tuition led me in a different direction for a few decades. But writing has always been my passion, and now I get to do it.
Well, really, really happy to get to follow your dream at last. Mm-hmm. And finally, what do you hope that people can take away from your book?
Well, in the mystery genre, what I'm trying to do there is bring a certain quality to that field that I saw John le Carré do in the spy field. Before John le Carré wrote his The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, those books. That genre was, James Bond, shoot 'em up, car chases and pretty girls sort of thing. I think the murder mystery field can use more substance, thornier moral and ethical issues, people with real problems, and not easy solutions. So I hope for people who read my books, they find them a little bit more substantive than the typical murder mystery that you can pick up in any airport bookshop.
That's brilliant. I hope so too. I'm gonna get Coldwater Revenge and read it, and so I can be ready for the second book when it comes.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll put all the links and everything for your Amazon and your website so people can go and download the book. Do you have social media?
I do. My website is jamesrossauthor.com. And from there, there's links to Facebook, LinkedIn, and everything else.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully we will get back in touch, and then when the next book is out, then we can chat more about that.
Very good. Thanks for having me on, Christina.
Bye everybody. See you in the next one.